Alright, so this will be a bit of a just shameless shilling for the liminal web, which I've generally been a part of, just contributing and talking to people for a few years now. The people are, for the most part, very, very approachable. And if you find them on any social media site, they'll talk to you and interact with you and share links and stuff like that. And so part of what makes the liminal web so important and different is that it represents a sort of paradigm shift of online education, especially to someone like me who isn't very classically educated, to be able to approach things, approach them in a more natural way, according to your own skill set. Now, I think that a lot of us like to think that a lot of things are sort of leaning that way as we go into the future, and that the last decade of the internet with, YouTube videos that you can approach, that could be something like a professor giving a lecture at Harvard or Yale. Normally, unless you were going to that place, you couldn't, not only would you not be able to view the lecture, but you wouldn't be able to then, chat with the professor in the comments if he felt like chatting with you. So for me, the liminal web kind of naturally emerged as a hub of people who were forward thinking in that way, and then held themselves to these high standards of coherency around really trying to move forward and work together and collaborate in a collective way, holding themselves to these different standards like an omni-win. So basically, it's not all about competition of somebody beating another person, but how can we collaborate together to win together, sort of thing. And there's been a lot of discussion in the liminal web about things like, hierarchies. We want to try to get rid of the classical notion of hierarchy. So often when I talk about levels of something, I try to talk about them in spaces of orientation. So you're in a space of orientation rather than to say this guy's on a higher level than this guy or whatever. But sometimes you still end up saying that. So the point of it now is that is how the liminal web generally, for me, became a point of my own orientation and finding people inside of it. And it overlaps a lot with two things that I've been interested in, which is something called gameB and something called metamodernism. Metamodernism was after kind of ironic, I guess, take on postmodernism, adding all these complexity, meta elements, and some of them spiritual elements to reclaim spirituality. I'll get to that a little later. And gameB was a universal sort of idea of a different type of game theory, a different type of game that humanity could play collectively to get us out of the rut that we are in, of this constant competition and exploitation and destruction of resources, just sort of accelerationism, pushing into the future, hoping that we can just keep kicking the can down the road and eventually it'll all work itself out. Definitely a more conscious and mindful, complex, nuanced, and sympathetic, realistic way to look at how we build civilizations and collaborate with each other. So in gameB, they basically call this old world that most of us can agree on that is not serving us. They call that the game A. So A is, capitalism, it's exploitation, it's destruction of resources, it's exploitation, it's all these things. Game B is basically going to be the opposite of all of those. So that's the way they made it approachable. So the easiest way to approach the liminal web, I think, is through Joe Lightfoot. So Joe Lightfoot has a thing, the liminal web, mapping emergent subculture of sense makers, meta theorists, and system poets. Really good. I mean, he did such a great job. This is a lot of people refer to this as your hub to find it all. You see gameB in there, and then permaculture, localism, regeneralism. A lot of bioregeneralists in this who are actually going into places and regenerating the biosphere there, going into places and regenerating the soil and the farming, agriculture. Very, very hands-on and utilitarian, realistic and approachable and integrated, rather than just being about thinking about things all the time. It's a big thing. A lot of the people in these spaces are highly intellectual. They like to think a lot about things, but we don't want to just be thinking about all the time. Authentic relating, things like this. Relating between man and women, relating between relationships, just people in general. How do we respect each other? How do we do those things? Psychedelic medicine, integrative psychology. There's a lot of that type of stuff. Zach Stein, a lot of good people in there. Effective altruist. And post-politics and economics, a lot of post-politics. Integral is a developmental theory of personal, developmental, and spiritual stuff. Web 3.0 is super important. Web 3.0 is the sort of evolution of the web. It's more decentralized. The decentralization of everything is a huge thing. They call it, often they use the word holonic or holon, meaning that it's more like this. It's more like circles within circles that build off each other, like I said, instead of stages. This plays a lot into the liminal web itself because a lot of the people kind of just collaborate with each other openly and authentically. Rebel wisdom was a huge part of it and emerged. Jim Rutt himself is a huge approachable part of this. So if you go on to the Joe Lightfoot article, I mean, there's so much stuff about what it is mapping it. The people, Schmachtenberger has been on a few podcasts like Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman. This is Hansi, who is the Nordic metamodernism. He maps a lot of this stuff out well. I like his approach, and I do resonate a lot with the Nordic metamodernism and the sort of approachable metamodernism. Nora Bateson does warm data, which is basically has this institution that is really deep into returning the human aspect to data. You know what I mean? How can we humanize data and computerization and our interaction with these machines so that we don't ourselves just become these cold machines? So he has the whole list. People like Zach Stein, Joe Brewer does huge work in regenerating agriculture and farming. So many people, Jordan Hall, Charles Eisenstein does great work. So again, he's mapped, if you go down, I mean, this is a big map here. Stage theories, decentralization is huge, collaborative government, sense-making, polarization, the infinite game, meditation. Like I said, there's a huge resource that Joe Lightfoot has put here. Again, gameB, one of the easiest ways to approach it is just to look up an initiation to gameB on the YouTube channel, The Stoa. They made kind of like this cartoon. Jake Ruiz did a great job of making this kind of approachable 8-bit cartoon about what gameB is, an initiation into gameB. Really great. Basically talks about, whatever the thing is as a parasite, capitalism, or this constant sort of rivalrousness as a parasite. Maps it all out here. That was really good. Now, Jim Rutt is one of the most approachable on this, and StephenReed.net has a huge map of stuff like what Jim Rutt has talked about in his podcast. He has a huge podcast that he's done with all of these people. It's very approachable. He's very good at taking his notes and transcribing it. So this whole thing, cognitive science, governance, coherence, climate change, protocol, quantum mechanics, deep learning, meta crisis, free will, anything you click on in this StephenReed.net will open another gate to another map, and in that map it'll tell you the episodes on Jim Rutt which they have talked about these things, and it maps it all out this way. There's also if you go to chat.jimrutt.com, there is a chat bot of Jim Rutt where you can ask him the questions, and just like ChatGPT, it answers the questions based on the stuff that he's talked about in his show. Brendan Dempsey, I've talked to him a lot. I've talked to all these guys a lot over the years. He does an approachable version of metamodernism that's metamodern spirituality. He's written quite a few books. Like I said, I love talking to him. He's always super cool, approachable. He has a retreat up in Maine that he does for the metamodern guys, where they all get together in the retreat, do rituals, hang out, talk. Very human, very approachable, very cool. A few more of these people, try to squeeze some stuff in. And these are just random people who, like I said, I've talked to a lot over the last few years, read a lot of their material, and really dug into their collaborations and their perspectives and really appreciate them and value them. So Jamie Wheel is fairly well known in the scene. Some of these guys too, I've talked before about, they map over with sort of the Burning Man 2010 scene, where Burning Man and the sort of, whatever you want to call it, spiritual but non-religious, and people trying to kind of come up with new spiritualities and approachable and tangible things that we can call sacred, divine, and making it more human. A lot of those people kind of were around in the 2010 Burning Man scene. And it was around that time that a lot of them started to kind of realize, all right, we got to stop just kind of thinking about stuff and making art about stuff and kind of just getting into our own cloud of fantasizing about utopia. And we really got to start mobilizing on what we're going to do. So that was a lot of the people you'll see coming from that sort of scene. And there's some of them that are still online, and again, they're pretty popular, some of them. And some of this stuff's a little bit, it can be kind of wishy-washy, but they're still good people, and a lot of them do a lot of good work. But Jamie Wheel crosses over with a lot of these people. And he wrote the book Stealing Fire. I bought the book when it came out, and I really liked it. So Stealing Fire was about flow states, and he maps out how we have these flow states, whether you're playing music or you're making love or you're sometimes on drugs. or you're even exercising, we get into these biological flow states where, we almost feel like a euphoria. They talk about it a lot in runner's high and stuff like that when you exercise. And he talks about, it gets really into detail. He traveled the world, he worked with Navy SEALs, all that, to get into the detail of what actually happens to you physiologically in your biology when you get into those states, why it's important. They've mapped brains of people meditating and praying and doing these flow states, and what happens in your cerebral, your frontal cortex and all that is the same thing. You're entering the same state. So stealing fire was a play on the Prometheus thing of saying, we steal the fire from the gods. We use flow states, we use drugs, we use whatever, sexual psychotechnologies. What happens when we stop just abusing them and we actually start to use them in respectful ways, again, like collectively? So I read his book. Like I said, I really liked it. I've read a ton of his stuff. His interviews are always great. When he talks about stuff, he's just on the level of really saying, what are you going to do about it right now? He worked in survivalism and stuff. So one thing he said that I always talk about is he talked about going into a place like maybe a disaster zone or an avalanche, for example. And he says, when I go into an avalanche, it's me first, me second, my partner third, and the victim fourth. And again, these guys cross over a lot with the really healthy and progressive, feminine and masculine empowerment movements. So again, you're not going to get any Andrew Tate bullshit here. You're just going to get the real thing. And when he says that, again, it's about empowerment of what he's saying about responsibility. It's me first, me second, my partner third, the victim fourth. Basically saying if someone has been buried under an avalanche and I don't look after me first, everybody dies. Because I'm the guy who's there to save them. So if I get freaked out or if I'm getting distracted or I'm not doing my job, everyone suffers. So the guy freaking out with his leg cut off, guess what, dude? You just got to be quiet for the minute while I can figure this out because I'm the guy. And so he talks a lot about that. Like I said, the flow states, the biology that's involved in it. Great work and research on the anthropology of religion and these sorts of things. Great resource. Zach Stein, Time Between Worlds. He does work with Dan Schmachtenberger at the Consilience Project. Like I said, great resource. He says essays on the future of schools, technology, and society. Some of the stuff he's doing to approach building schools and education in a different, much, much better way. In the way that a lot of us have dreamed about it when we think about anti-capitalism and stuff like that. How do you build a school and an educational facility where it's about the kids' wants, desires, needs, dreams, and what they're good at, resting on stuff like that. He does a ton of work in that, always super approachable. Some of his recent, if you look him up on YouTube, Zach Stein, his recent videos on things like AI are some of the best I've found, and I know a lot about this shit, and his perspective is something you'll find very rare, and his uniqueness and his clarity, just like Jamie Wheal, of the way he talks and maps things out, again, is going to be something that you're not going to find everywhere. Future Fossils with Michael Garfield. I've talked to Michael Garfield for years. I actually consider him a friend. I mean, the dude, he's just an awesome dude. I mean, he's very creative. He is an artist, very colorful, highly intelligent, and unique in his thinking. The stuff that comes from this guy is just mind-blowing, and like I said, I really like this guy. He's one of these people who, over the years, I started to consider him a friend, really respect his work. Great stuff if you really want to get into artificial intelligence and spirituality and, like I said, history, anthropology, all this type of stuff. Great stuff there. Layman Pascal does a lot of different stuff. Right here it says, I respond to questions on post-metaphysics, non-duality, metamodernism, integral theory, new shamanism, future of religion, developmental philosophy, meta-progressive politics. Again, if you look up Layman Pascal and you look up some of his videos with the Stoa and stuff, he does great stuff. A great history and a great person to describe different things like what he was talking about opponent processing and these different spiritual modalities going all the way back to, the original Hindu type things coming all the way up until now. Really approachable. Again, someone who I've talked to a lot and really appreciate. A lot of people in here, like I said, this is just kind of random people in no particular order that I've talked to a lot over the last few years. This is Unified Theory of Knowledge. He also calls it U-Talk with Greg Henriques. And so his stuff is really, really on another level. We'll read some here. Tree of Knowledge, Justification Systems Theory, Behavioral Investment Theory, The Influence Matrix, the nested model of well-being. I mean, if you go into U-Talk and you really look at his mapping of like the 4 dimensions of existence. You know what I mean? It is deep. Like, it is no joke. I mean, I watched some of his breakdowns of Utah, and it was just incredible. And again, interviews on Jim Rutt, interviews on all of these guys. He has a particular explanation that I like on metamodernism on his YouTube, which is the metamodern plurality. The metamodern plurality has been one of my favorite things as an artist, as an approachable way to talk about good faith and the conversation and the dynamics of good faith, especially when you have like trolls or you have people who are trying to intentionally kind of be disruptive or stir the pot, but they're good people with good intentions. They just really need to get something out there, you know what I mean? And at first, everybody's like, what the fuck? So Jordan Hall and Jamie Wheel have talked about Rule Omega. I've talked about it before. Rule Omega was basically saying, you can't solve a problem going in with the same type of thinking you went in with. So, you need to think outside the box. Now, when someone comes from outside the box, you're almost always naturally going to say, that's bullshit, there's no way. It's either too simple and we would have thought about it, or it's so ridiculous it won't work. So that's the Rule Omega, is you got to shut the fuck up and hear the person out once you've established that they actually have good intentions and have something to say, even though you know it sounds ridiculous. So, like I said, in metamodern pluralism, he talks about that. It's basically the opposite of using doublespeak and being in bad faith and just manipulating people. It's a metamodern pluralism where you can come at it from all these different dynamic angles, but it still checks out and scales, and the language scales. The other thing, one of the best ones, I love this guy, I talk to him a lot, John Ash and his project Iris. If you look up the YouTube channel The Stoa and you look up The Wisdom of Iris, it's one of the best language models for up-signaling the signal through noise that you're going to find. Multiple things, and a lot of the people in the gameB space and in liminal web have started to use these themselves. They'll have a discussion on their podcast, and then after that they'll use these complex language models to find things they were talking about and relationships between them and different avenues of discussion that even they didn't realize going in. So again, these are just some of the people. I know I left a lot of people out. The Earth Species Project is a huge one. If you look up the YouTube channel, or you look up the YouTubes on Earth Species Project, dynamic mapping of language between species, great stuff.